Today on Empowering Workplaces, we're talking with Eric Stone, speaker and author of the book Jumpstart Your Workplace Culture about employee engagement and inspiring high performance. Welcome to Empowering Workplaces, a show for anyone who wants to make work better and more fulfilling. We're your hosts, organizational psychologist Sanya Lucina
and aspiring leader Guille Santana. Join us in today's inspiring conversation.
Eric, welcome to Empowering Workplaces. It is such a pleasure to have you on. When Guy and I found out about your book and what you stand for as a person and just your general mission, we absolutely had to have you on. It's something that we know is so incredibly important in the world today. It's so incredibly important in workplaces today. So first, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. Thank you so much for taking the time to write this incredibly valuable book and sharing it with the world. We are ready to ask you many questions, but before we get started, can you please tell us a little bit more about yourself? We'd love, I know whenever we kick off, our listeners are always really curious to know who they're going to be getting their expertise from. So please tell us more about yourself. What inspired you to write anything you feel like sharing with us and our audience?
You bet. Well, it's an honor to be on the podcast here. So thank you for the opportunity. So I'll give you a little bit about me. I always fascinated with business, always fascinated with what organizations, business or sports organizations do to create this special environment, this unique experience that eventually leads to really impressive results. Now, my dad was a textile salesman and my mom was a teacher, and I pulled a little bit from both. So love of business, my parents guided me, and I go to school at college to study business. And I had of course, graduate, and I'm thinking, geez, I'm going to be the GM of the Boston Red Sox, but they weren't hiring. So I got lucky and landed in a company called Enterprise Holdings, which is now called Enterprise Mobility. And I had an amazing experience, entry level, and having an opportunity to eventually lead a few hundred employees. And when I retired from Enterprise, I made a decision that I felt I had something to give, something more to give. And so while I had an opportunity to work with really impressive people and lead a few hundred employees, I felt my message would hopefully be able to impact even more. And I said, you know what, I'm going to attempt to write a book. Created an outline. Fast forward a couple of years later, the book gets complete, and that's where we are now, as a chance to really share something I'm very passionate about.
Oh, I love that so much, and how wonderful it is to hear that you come from a good place and positive experience, because unfortunately not everybody has that. And we've had different guests, they know, well said, I've been in a place and, I don't really wish it on anyone, or, it's been challenging. But I think especially when we have positive experiences and when we've seen organizations do something right and we want to spread that even further, I feel like it comes from such a place of really nice energy. So I'm really glad to hear about your experience and your career so far. And what a noble thing to share that with as many people as you can. And even when you're saying, you're leading a couple hundred or a few hundred people, that's a lot of people to make an impact on. But then when you think about the world,
Very small.
in a way, it's like, okay, like I can definitely take what I've learned and the positive things that I would want to share and make that even more exponential. So definitely love hearing that. So in your book, Jumpstart Your Workplace Culture, you discuss practical strategies for keeping employees engaged. And one of the things that you talk about in particular is burnout. Now, let me tell you, I've read and studied so much about burnout, and I know a lot of researchers like myself call research me search. And I feel like I've gone through different parts in my career where generally I've also been pretty lucky that I've loved the jobs that I've had and that I felt very passionately about them. And sometimes it's not necessarily, it's not that you only feel burnout if you don't like your job. Sometimes we can love our job and still feel that sense of, I don't know if I have anything left to give and I really need a break. So in your experience, what are some ways that people can avoid burnout? What are some ways that we feel like we could still really give our work our all, but not burning ourselves into the ground in the meantime?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with the leadership within the organization to start with. And I think there are a few factors that these leaders need to be able to do to allow their employees to be at their best. I think the first one is just what are these organizations doing to create a strong relationship with their team? And that's just not from one level to the next, it's throughout the entire organization. So for each factor I'm going to give, just think of 2 or 3 initiatives you should have within your organization that encourage this behavior. I think they're really good at being clear with their communication of expectations and goals. Everyone knows where they stand. Everyone has a role and hopefully can star in that role.
Yeah.
They are great at giving training, right material, equipment, information in order to achieve the desired outcome. When I was given information to be successful, it really removes some of the anxieties that can happen. I think those that encourage personal and professional growth within the workplace and or outside, really, really important. So when I get home, I'm not all anxious and struggling and in a million directions. And then the last big one, I think, is the corporations who reward top performance and allow me to celebrate when I've worked really hard, that I get this, whether it's an award, a high five, a plaque, a certificate, a day off, whatever that may be. And I think organizations who do that allow their employees to feel that they're in a great place. People care about them. And it's amazing what happens when trust is built. If you want unique, I always say you want unique results, you've got to have unique relationships.
Yeah. Well, thank you for those. I think when we talk about what organizations can do, what leaders can do, a lot of times we can lean on more theoretical thoughts. And I love the way you shared with us is that there are a lot of very practical pieces of advice, like celebrating, like understanding what people need and developing. And it's interesting because in a recent study that Guy and I just did at Question Pro, we actually found we surveyed about 10,000 employees, and 56% of full-time workers said that they have enough energy to do what they want to do after work. It's only 56, so only half of the people. And of course, we dug into the data and we realized that the people that felt depleted of energy after work were also the ones that felt like they couldn't reach their goals and they were not in a good position. And so it was almost either you were thriving and doing well in both, or you were really struggling in both. So there's a lot, to be said around organizations really taking care of their people, and how much, to your point, it also really goes into all of their aspects of their life. Like, we know by now that we don't have an on and off switch. There's no way that we can have a huge challenge in work and just become a completely different person when we go spend time with family and friends. And so now just this continued understanding of how do you really manage and handle both in a very complementary way, I think is something organizations, it's important for us to continue to strive towards and figure out what works for our unique culture.
You said something important about family or friends. I always would think when my team goes home and they're at a holiday party, a picnic, a birthday party, inevitably someone's going to come up to you. And what do they normally ask? They usually ask, well, how are you? But how's your job?
Yeah.
And I always wanted that experience to be a really good experience. And so that's why some of those factors are so critical, because you need the support at home. And if all you do is vent, the person on the other side is going to be very empathetic and sympathetic to you. And they're going to eventually stop supporting what you're doing and tell you to leave. And so, so important at home.
Yeah.
I love that. So, Eric, now that we're talking about avoiding burnout and work-life balance, in your experience, what do you think the role of flexibility plays in maintaining employee engagement, and how can leaders balance this with the need for accountability in their work?
Yeah, that is a great question. I don't think people talk about it enough, the flexibility with accountability. So I think there's twofold. I think on the flexibility side, it's a leadership principle, or it is behaviors that. So for example, we have 5 generations within the workplace, and the organizations who are going to be unbelievably successful are going to be those who are valuing different aspects of everyone's journey. And they take all of this and put it together to bring out their best. So leadership has to be super flexible to create this listen, observe, and learn, kind of the seeds of trust philosophy or culture. And then you have the flexibility to policies and procedures. And so whether that is what we call the flexibility debate with remote, in-person, or hybrid would be a policy or procedure. And what are you trying to do as you listen to your team to be the most innovative, collaborative? What are you trying to do to listen to everybody? And I think it plays an unbelievable role with what is going on right now in the business climate. And so again, leadership principles must be flexible, and the policies and procedures have to be flexible too. When you remove some of the complications in business, one of my philosophies was when you remove the complexity, when you make things simple, it allows the stress and anxiety to sometimes get removed. And what most people actually do want to be is held accountable. When you look at a lot of the surveys, and we used to do a lot of our employee opinion surveys, one of the things that was alarming to me is that people actually felt we did a poor job dealing with non-performers. And so they're telling us, why are we tolerating that? And so I always felt they're very symbiotic. I'd almost say flexibility, accountability goes to the symbiotic or symbiosis of culture and strategy. They have to work together with each other. If you have this strategy that your culture can't execute, it's not going to work. And same with flexibility and accountability.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think there's still, I mean, we're seeing that in the marketplace and the workplace, that organizations are still struggling with that balance. And I think, in theory, sometimes they're saying we want to give flexibility, but then there is this, I don't know if it's a lack of trust, or sometimes they're so used to having more visibility, maybe before, especially people who have been in the workplace longer and are used to working in offices, is almost all of a sudden, if I can't see you, how do I fully trust, or how do I fully know that you're doing something? How can I give that flexibility? But if you think about it, I've never made this analogy, maybe it'll be a little goofy, but for any of us that have life partners, we're not with them all the time. They go to work, we don't know what they're doing. We have to trust them that they're not doing what they shouldn't be doing.
Right.
And so I think we have to think about that. Similar, like with kids, like at some point they go to school, they go away. You have to, trust that overall they're making the right decisions for themselves. They're making the right decisions for others. So I do think as a society globally, we're still a little bit of a work in progress for that. But I'm very hopeful that, researchers, publishers, those of you who are, those who are as passionate about this as you are going to continue to carry that message and continue to, say it in different ways, because sometimes I think people just need to maybe hear slightly different words for it to resonate with them.
Yeah.
So maybe the more all of us who believe in it say it and continue to say it and give different examples and say it in different words in different ways, the more it's actually going to reach the wider population that can really internalize it.
The other interesting thing with flexibility is we look a lot to the employee. And I recently did a post. We have to be really mindful, and we should be concerned about the employee experience, of course, but we have to watch the customer's journey. And I don't know if you've noticed it, but with engagement dropping down, the experiences I've had with working with a company, whether it's a healthcare company or whoever it is, and I have a problem, is really, really important. And so the engaged employee who you are being flexible with has to pay that over with the culture to the customer. And they have to be very mindful of what flexibility means for the customer as well. And so I hope we don't get too one-sided, again, probably symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that I think is interesting when we think about culture and when we think about leaders and managers is empowering them, giving them the tools to be able to shape culture in meaningful ways. And in your book, you talk about some indicators that leaders can look for to understand, is something changing with the culture maybe in a way that we don't want it to? Because I think a lot of times, and you mentioned employee surveys, and at Question Pro, that's, a big part of our business and they're really valuable. But we also believe that culture maintenance, culture change, how we care for it, can only happen at the top. It can't, HR needs to be an important part. All of these are important parts of the process, but every single leader, every single manager has a significant impact. So what are some things that leaders can look out for if they're starting to maybe see some changes in their culture, especially in the direction that they don't really enjoy?
Yeah, I think the first thing, and it's very similar to what you've heard, maybe what Starbucks might do, leadership presence is so critical to understanding Is our plan being executed? And are we giving everyone the right tools and equipment to be successful? The Starbucks CEO, I think, spends a half a day a month. And again, this is a person who has a pretty big operation. And he is side by side with the baristas, understanding their challenges and opportunities and always listening, observing, and learning from his team. And so I know one thing I always try to do, step one, is it's being part of a training class and asking questions of how are we doing and what are we missing potentially. It is being part of a very important sales call, a VIP meeting where you're seeing the exchanges and what happens when you're there. If it's not happening when you're there, it's probably rarely going to happen. And so I think one thing is leadership presence is so important to be able to uncover what's actually going on. And it lets you get a realistic viewpoint of some of the challenges. And then you'll get the mood and artifacts that some people might talk about. So you might go into the field, depending if you have a bunch of brick and mortar stores, and you're looking for those buzzwords, those things that people talk about within your organization that resonate with everybody and are very contagious. We used to have a championship sales belt or a customer service trophy. Now, if that's in the closet collecting dust, I think we know we've dropped the ball a little bit. And so those mood and artifacts you have to be very, very mindful of. And then you'll also get these little smoke signals that you'll see. I was big on events and who attended. I'm big on absenteeism and how often that was happening. I am big on customer service making huge drops, vendors and partners leaving us for some reason, lack of innovation within our organization. These are all things outside of course, an engagement, an employee pulse survey, or whatever it may be. And so those are just a few things that you can be mindful of outside of obviously when big numbers drop within your organization, market share drops, it usually could mean something brewing.
Yeah. No, but I think to your point too, like doing them also more proactively sometimes. So of course, a lot of us get wrapped into our day to day. We know, it's good to think ahead, be proactive. Sometimes we don't do it, not because we don't care. However, when those even slight changes start happening, I really like your examples. And I think the more managers can remind themselves to be in the front lines, I think especially the ones that maybe haven't interacted with customers as frequently lately, or maybe not even in that job, depending on how senior you are. You might go into a level of the organization that you were never a barista, that you never had that kind of experience or, the equivalent to, and then really being mindful of that and really taking the time, because a lot of times also, again, out of the goodness of our hearts, so we might say like, hey, when I did this 20 years ago, it worked really well. And some things still will, and other things will not. A lot of shame. So taking our advice and our best practices, even with the whole heart and even with the best intentions, it's good to go out there and see, is this still relevant? How are people talking? How are they thinking? And sometimes almost trying to do it, like you never want to show up to a call and not say who you are. That's deceitful. But trying to do it in some ways and as incognito as possible too, or being a listener maybe, just so people are more transparent. Because all of us, you say like, oh, the VP of XYZ shows up or the CEO. You might get slightly different treatment that your team is getting when it's just them. So trying to think about how do you insert yourself in the situation so you understand those experiences as authentically as possible.
There are a couple other small things that at least allow you to uncover. I write about it and call them culture carriers. And most organizations will have some sort of group that they bring in. Ours were always nominated by their peers, not by me. And we would always meet, and I'd want them to politely disagree. I did not want people to just yes me to death. I really wanted them to challenge my thinking because I knew I don't have all the answers. And so culture carriers, as you get them, will also come to you in these meetings and say, Eric, you got to be mindful. This is I know we intended this. It's not working. The other was really what you were talking about. We used to call it it would be a phone shop. I'd have my executive assistant. So we'd have a big contest and we're trying to have fun. And when with a big contest, that means there's big money coming out. So we need everybody to know about it. And so one way to see who was delivering the message, I call it the ABCs of communication, A's amplify, is we would have my executive assistant just randomly reach out. Hey, how are you? How's your day going? Hey, can you do me a favor? What's the contest that we have going on? Now, we wouldn't embarrass somebody if they didn't know, but there were some I don't want to call them penalties, but there was some accountability, we'll call it, that would happen if you didn't know, and you'd get one more chance to try to make sure you knew the contest. But small things, when there's a breakdown in communication, there's a cultural deficit.
I am going to borrow that idea in so many different ways. You just gave me such a great idea for a few different projects we're working on. So thank you.
You got
I'm
it.
taking that one to heart tomorrow. Action tomorrow.
Love it.
Now, Eric, when leaders are attempting to improve workplace culture, what do you think are the common pitfalls that leaders should avoid?
I think the two simplest ones, one, the flavor of the week. I have worked with so many organizations, been part of my own victim of, this week it's all about market share. And then next week, oh, wait, time out. We've got to have our customer service experience. Our net promoter score is going down. Wait, time out. It's all about compliance. Wait a sec. New technology is coming in and it becomes really challenging to understand what we're trying to do. And I used to always recommend boards. So if you're on a nonprofit board or a board in general is, what are those three things? Ask them separately. What are the three things that we're trying to work on? And you'll be amazed sometimes, unfortunately, how different they can be. So flavor of the week is really disruptive. You can't get traction. You lose momentum and people just almost naysay the idea. And then there is complexity. I'll give you a quick example. I was talking to somebody about a time off policy. Was coming in this business, they wanted it, rightfully so. You got to be really mindful of everyone being off during a crucial spike in business. And I read the email 4 times. I couldn't understand it. I didn't even understand it. And matter of fact, my understanding was actually more of a lack of trust. And it was everything you wouldn't have wanted to deliver. Matter of fact, something as severe as that, under the amplify the message, might want to be in a room full of your team to truly explain how it is. So there are no disconnects. Maybe you create a little video. I don't know what you need to do, but they create a very complicated system. Those are 2 quick things that I think leaders are falling short on.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of times, when we think about culture, I think I equate oftentimes my day-to-day work with, general changes and sustainable changes. And for a lot of my career, I've been in product development. And I remember talking to a colleague of mine, this was many years ago, and he was new to the role at the time. And he was saying, the hard work is almost done in building the product. And I was like, oh, my friend, but after the launch is when the hard work starts.
Yeah.
Because when you're building it, everything's fun and game. There's no KPI, like there's KPIs and how quickly you're getting things done and are you meeting the deadlines, but then any usage, any adoption, that's the game after. And that's where it starts to get really challenging. And so I think that's very similar for organizational cultures. A lot of times, like we'll think of something that's maybe, is it going to be a quick fix and is it going to have a short-term impact? But I think there's some, not necessarily that every short-term impact is bad, but if it's something that's intentionally supposed to be longer term and you get a spike and then something, falls flat right after and you don't have a way to sustain it, I've seen that actually backfire in culture sometimes. Because if you say, hey, we're going to do this, we're focusing on this, all of a sudden, there's no long-term support. There's no long-term plan. You do that twice, you do that 3 times. But the third time, the people that were around for the first one are going to say, but we've been a part of this like version of something for a while. It's a flavor of X and then it'll just go away. What do you think are some ways that organizations can avoid that? I mean, and again, like, I don't usually think that it's ill-intentioned. I think a lot of times it's maybe a lack of resources or not as much planning or maybe some lack of experience. But from what you've seen, how can organizations launch more sustainable, more long-term impact culture changes?
I'll try to give an example that I think will hit to the point, and it threads maybe a few questions. But so I was working with an organization whose customer service was struggling, and they're going into their peak time, and they needed to do something immediately. and we did some research and we found this video about Johnny the Bagger. So I don't know if you've ever heard the story about Johnny the Bagger. I'll give you the quick version. It was a young grocer who had Down syndrome, and he ended up transforming because he would put a thought of the day into everyone's bag and then transformed everyone's experience. His line was 3 times as long. Then all of a sudden the floral department tries to do what Johnny did. And they now on any broken or unused corsage, pin it on a young child or adult throughout the store, and everything gets transformed. So I saw this video and I said, okay, if we're trying to change a behavior, short or long term, this is a perfect video. What are we going to do with it? Again, bring my culture carriers together, bring the people together and say, how can we roll this out? What's the best way throughout the entire journey so it is not a one-stop shop? It then became our new hire training video to demonstrate what does it mean to be Johnny the Bagger. But we don't stop there. It was part of the first training class under customer service and how to put your personal signature on every interaction that you have. But it didn't stop there. We would have a monthly contest of who is going to demonstrate and win the Johnny the Bagger Award. And so you would have to submit these stories after your weekly meetings of who would win the Johnny the Bagger Award. Well, then they get a chance to be recognized. That was one of the factors, reward top performance. It doesn't stop there. It matches one of the company's values. It makes sense. Customer service or experiences are very important. And so you take this thing and it just becomes integral to the entire roadmap of what you're doing. The culture gets changed short and long term. It's not a one-off. This one's staying. And it was amazing the momentum you can get. And I think organizations struggle at threading the needle throughout the entire organization with whatever they're trying to communicate. And there's a small example of being very intentional, almost tactical with it.
Yeah, I think you have to. And I think to me, having somebody that really believes in it take ownership of that, because it sometimes get exhausting. And it can get very tactical for it to work because you need in a way to have schedule and to have ideas and to measure what's working and measure what's not working. It's not something that's just good intentions easily translate. It's a lot of hard work. And a lot of times it's a lot of very detailed work and maybe not always as exciting, right? The big vision can be something exciting, but when you have to execute so strategically and throughout, at some point you might get tired, but that in a way that perseverance and that continuity is really important. So I really appreciate you saying that, because I think sometimes, the story that you were saying, it brought tears to my eyes. I wrote down, Johnny the Bagger so I can remember him. And then, but it didn't stop there, to your point. It didn't stop at this inspirational video. It really translated to so many employee life cycle touch points, but that didn't happen by chance. That was very intentional. And somebody had to, I'm saying somebody because usually it has to be at least one person that's like really the owner of the execution, but maybe even a team that really kept following through to make sure that resonates through and through and doesn't stop at one point in time and then really lose its impact over time.
Yeah. Yeah. One other small thing I don't know if I said this in the explanation, but we also included it. A lot of company reviews are so old, it's like we've been using it for 20 years. And it's what are we doing to update and change with the times? And so under the other column, under customer service, we kind of put, are they living the Johnny the Bagger mentality? Again, yet another opportunity to recognize greatness.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And you mentioned values too. And we recently had a conversation with one of our guests about, she was saying how a lot of organizations she works with are now redefining their values and updating them. And in our work, we've seen that to be so incredibly important because it does help make sure to strengthen that message so much. Because when you're saying this is what's important in our organization, this is what we're going to do, if you can tie it to one of the values, I think it really brings that importance and that highlight in a really significant way.
Absolutely. One of the things I tell organizations, every value should have a way to get recognized, and it needs to be within the fabric of the company. So absolutely.
No. Well, now that we're talking about updating and changing with the times, how do you think some leaders continue to inspire high performance while optimizing profits, growth, and retention. So that what can they do? Because you mentioned that it's not a one-off, and sometimes it can be very tactical.
Yeah, not easy to consistently have this sustained excellence with avoiding burnout. And I would go back to some of the things we might have talked about. I mean, I think the way they do it are those 5 factors are a big piece of it. I think the other thing that organizations, I actually call it the hourglass approach. So I'll share, it's actually behind me, but it's so small. Oh, it's on this.
I see it.
So this was an approach that really, again, the whole thing is how do we get a group of individuals together to achieve excellence and have everyone be the best that they can possibly be and unlock their potential. And so the word hourglass has hour in it, O-U-R, and it doesn't have eyeglass that I've had since I was really young. So it's not about eye, it's about hour. And if you won't be able to see the words, but on the top is really the discovery stage. And that is great organizations who are performing for a consistent period of time are pulling information, listen, observe, and learning, getting feedback from clients, stakeholders, customers, board members, whoever it may be. And as the hourglass will eventually come out, they're starting to orchestrate what we would like to do. So they're trying to figure out what is this path. And as it eventually goes right to where the sand comes out, that is the clarity. Those are your 3 to 5 initiatives that everyone needs to be aware of. Now, everyone's going to have a different role in those 3 to 5 initiatives based on their level of experience. And so that is the amplification of the message that we used to call them the big rock items. Everyone needs to know about it. But now as it comes out, these organizations find a way to reinforce the message. So as it goes out, all of the employees, all of the groups, no silos allowed, are aware of what's going on through training, reviews, what have you. And then as the sand eventually hits, it is an assessment time. And that is where they're going to assess what's going on within their organization. Now, you'll notice there are 2 pillars on each side. I'll try to get out of the way of so one side has to be about your mission, vision, and values. The other are your policies and procedures that we talked about a little earlier. And those are going to guide you through your decision making. And so now the thing about culture, right when you think you have it, it's ever moving, flowing. You got to be ready for it. It's almost like personal branding, like you're always working on it. You turn the hourglass over, and depending on where you are within the hourglass, you can kind of reassess. Mm-hmm. So I think that's at least an approach in addition to some of the stuff we talked about earlier. I think they're really good at celebrating their victories. I probably could have done a better job for myself celebrating my own victories. I need to work on that sometimes, but they're great at celebrating their victories. And so that's a nice little approach. It's a visual and easily to follow.
Oh. Eric, I'm so grateful for our time today, for everything that you shared, for all of your advice, for the passion that you bring into your work. And so as our conversation draws to a close today, I know we'll be talking with you again in the future. I'm sure of it. You shared so much with us already. Is there anything that we didn't ask you about, anything that we didn't cover in our conversation that you'd like to highlight for our listeners? Or is there maybe a favorite point that we did talk about that you would like to maybe reiterate and highlight as we start to wrap up?
Well, you've asked some great questions. So it's hard to even say, is there something you didn't? You had so many really good questions. I would just say, one of the goals outside of a practical roadmap I was trying to create is almost, I sometimes feel culture can be misunderstood. And I don't think it's not this soft and philosophical hugs and high fives and rousing speeches. And while those are helpful, it is what we talked about. It is having high character with a high standard. It is being empathetic with accountability. And so I feel people misunderstand how important culture is. And in my opinion, it is the shock absorber for the organizations during difficult times that allow people, when you're really at that breaking point, the whole culture brings you just get brought through it a little bit. So that would maybe be the only small thing I would say is one of my goals.
Oh, well, thank you for that. And so just to remind our listeners, the title of your book is Jumpstart Your Workplace Culture. Where can they find it if they're looking for a copy?
Yes, they can go to Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Amplify Publishing, at a bookstore near you. One of the really cool highlights, and this took a long time, was every state in North America, Barnes and Noble is carrying the book. Not every Barnes and Noble, but I was able to get every state to be part of the journey. And so that was really cool. But you could get it at a bookstore near you. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, probably some of the easier ones around here.
Oh, congratulations. That's a huge feat. That's a huge accomplishment. And for anyone that maybe would want to get in touch with you, learn more about you, about your work, where's the best place for them to find you?
I would say LinkedIn is probably the best place. And as my daughter has helped me get on Instagram, I'm starting to create a little bit there. So ClearPath Ventures _ is where I am on Instagram. But I'm on Facebook too. And so those are the easiest places. Or you go to ericdstone.com. It tells you a little bit about the book and things like that.
Perfect. Well, Eric, thank you so much again. It's just been an absolute pleasure to spend this time with you. And again, thank you for everything that you do. Thank you for the contribution to our field. It's been a pleasure and an honor.
Vice versa. Absolutely. Thank you both.